So you hear phrases like monster lawsuit, uh, maybe even the mother of all lawsuits, right?
Yeah, definitely. Makes you stop and think, what's that about?
Exactly. And today we're actually diving into just such a case, a really massive legal challenge aimed at the Trump administration.
And what's really striking from the get-go is just how ambitious this whole thing was. It wasn't, targeting one specific rule or policy.
No, it was much broader, like a full-on challenge to how the administration was, well, governing.
That's the key. Our mission here, using the details we've got from our source material, this pasted text, is to really unpack the scope, the implications of this pretty unprecedented lawsuit.
Yeah, because what made it so different was this focus on the claim was a systematic dismantling of the entire federal government, not just tweaking things.
Right, most lawsuits, they pick off one action here, another there. This was saying the whole operational approach was fundamentally flawed, constitutionally speaking.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of it then. This mother of all lawsuits. The central claim was what exactly?
It argued the administration was basically taking apart the federal government unconstitutionally.
How? Was it workforce reductions?
Yes, significant cuts to the federal workforce, and also these big reorganizations of government agencies. The argument was they were doing this without getting the okay from Congress.
Bypassing Congress's authority.
Precisely.
Now, you listening might be thinking, okay, government reorganizations, workforce numbers. Why does this really matter to me?
That's a fair question. It can sound a bit bureaucratic, maybe.
Sure, like inside baseball. But think about what these federal agencies actually do day to day.
They're behind so many things we just take for granted. Clean water, environmental protection.
Public health research, innovation, even national security. These aren't abstract concepts. They rely on the people and the structures within these agencies.
And the lawsuit, our source material makes this clear, was zeroing in on what happens when that structure is allegedly weakened or taken apart without proper process.
Right. And the pasted text really highlights that this wasn't just, one single group complaining.
No, it was quite a coalition. You had labor unions representing the actual federal employees.
The folks doing the work.
Exactly. Then nonprofit organizations, groups focused on public interest issues, and even local governments.
Saying these changes were hitting them directly.
Yeah. And big names involved too, like Democracy Forward and Norm Eisen, really pushing this forward.
Yeah.
The source also mentions the breadth of defendants, which tells you just how wide a net this lawsuit cast.
And the language used to describe it. The source calls them sweeping reductions and massive reorganization. Doesn't sound minor.
No, it definitely paints a picture of really fundamental shifts in government operations.
So the legal argument hinges on the Constitution, right? Separation of powers.
Absolutely. That's the bedrock. This idea that power is divided, executive, legislative, judicial, so no single branch gets too dominant.
And the lawsuit essentially said, look, Congress is the one that creates and funds these agencies.
Right. That's their constitutional role.
So for the executive branch, the administration, to come in and make these huge changes, workforce cuts, restructuring without Congress explicitly signing off.
That, the plaintiffs argued, was overstepping executive authority. It violated that separation of powers.
It's an important distinction, isn't it? Because the president does have power.
Oh, absolutely. Appointing agency heads, setting policy direction within the laws Congress passes. That's clear.
But this lawsuit drew a line. It said, okay, setting direction is one thing.
But fundamentally dismantling or rebuilding the agency itself, that needs legislative action. Congress has to be involved because they created it in the first place. That was the core of their argument.
And the potential consequences if this alleged dismantling went unchecked, the source touches on that too.
Yeah, pretty significant potential effects. Long-lasting ones, maybe.
Like losing expertise. People who've been in these agencies for years, decades sometimes.
Exactly. That loss of institutional knowledge. It could stall progress on, say, scientific research, or just generally make government less effective at doing its job.
And rebuilding that, if it's lost, that takes time. A lot of time.
Definitely not a quick fix.
Okay, let's shift to the legal battlefield itself. The source gives us a sense of the scale. You mentioned the wide net.
Huge scale. The complaint itself was, 115 pages long, according to the text?
Wow.
And the list of plaintiffs and defendants, just extensive. It really underscores this wasn't a minor skirmish.
And the plaintiffs, you mentioned the labor unions, nonprofits.
And states, too.
Right.
California, Illinois, Maryland, Texas, Washington. A real mix, geographically and in terms of interests. Shows it wasn't just one sector feeling the impact.
And Norm Eisen, who we mentioned, the source quotes him explaining the goal.
Yeah, he framed it as being about preserving that constitutional balance, preventing, in his words, unchecked presidential overreach. The idea was that the system is designed precisely to stop that kind of thing.
So the legal strategy was pretty clear. Stop these actions they saw as illegal attempts to undermine how government is supposed to work.
That was the aim, yeah. Put a halt to it.
Now, putting this in context.
Yeah.
The source mentions the political environment back then. Lots of executive orders flying around, especially early on.
Right, that shock and awe period, some called it. A very rapid pace of executive action, which naturally drew a lot of legal attention.
Hundreds of lawsuits, apparently, challenging different things.
But this one stood out, didn't it? Because of that sheer scope. It wasn't just about one policy. It was about the whole approach, the alleged dismantling itself.
And the stakes were high. The potential outcomes. What did the source say about that?
Well, if the lawsuit had succeeded, it could have really put the brakes on those workforce cuts and reorganizations.
A clear statement about the limits of presidential power in this area.
Exactly. But if it failed,
Then what?
the source suggests it might have, well, emboldened future presidents. Perhaps opened the door to more aggressive executive action and reshaping government, maybe without needing Congress's explicit buy-in every time.
So really fundamental questions about the balance of power were on the line.
Absolutely. High stakes.
Looking at the bigger picture, the support for this lawsuit was pretty broad, wasn't it? You mentioned states.
Yeah. Attorneys general from 22 states eventually joined in supporting the challenge, plus groups like the ACLU. It shows widespread concern crossing different lines.
And the source talks about this legal strategy, flooding the zone. Can you explain that?
It's this idea of hitting the administration with multiple legal challenges on various fronts all at once.
Kind of overwhelming them?
Potentially, yeah. Straining their legal resources, making it harder to push through their agenda without constantly fighting court battles.
The source draws an interesting parallel there, linking that legal strategy to the administration's own sort of shock and awe governing style.
It's like the opposition adopted a similar high-volume tactic, but through the courts.
And this really throws the spotlight on the courts, doesn't it? As a check on power.
Especially when, perhaps, Congress is seen as gridlocked or maybe not pushing back as hard. The judiciary becomes a key arena.
Our source definitely points that out. In the absence of strong checks elsewhere, the courts often ended up being the place where these fundamental fights over government authority played out.
And you saw judges stepping in, right? Issuing injunctions, blocking certain actions, at least temporarily.
Buying time, maybe preserving the status quo while the legal arguments unfolded.
Sure. Though the source also notes the administration wasn't always deterred by these setbacks.
How so?
Well, they often continued issuing orders, maybe tweaking them, and sometimes used the court battles politically, framing them as, obstruction by judges.
Interesting. So the legal fight becomes part of the political narrative, too.
Definitely. And looking down the road, the source raises the possibility of the Supreme Court getting involved.
Because these are fundamental constitutional questions.
Exactly. Separation of powers, the limits of executive authority, these are big ones. While the court doesn't always jump into these directly, sometimes focusing on procedure.
The underlying issues might eventually demand a final word from the highest court.
It's certainly possible. These questions have long-term implications.
So boiling it all down, this mother of all lawsuits, as the source calls it, it really was a landmark challenge.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about policy details. It was about the fundamental structure of American government, that balance between the branches.
A core debate about how much power the executive branch holds, especially when it comes to the agencies Congress created.
That's the crust of it. The significance goes way beyond one administration or one set of policies. It's about governance itself.
Right. So a final thought for you, the listener, as you process all this, think about the long game here.
Yeah, what are the lasting implications for how our federal government is structured and how it functions? This isn't really a partisan point. It affects everyone.
Think about the role each branch is supposed to play: executive, legislative, judicial. Those checks and balances.
What does a massive lawsuit like this tell us about how that relationship is working, or maybe how it's changing? It's definitely something to keep thinking about.